Good afternoon, everybody. It's Hank Linderman here on Getting Angry. Today is Friday, September 25th. Year 2020, the strangest year I've ever been in. Let's have a look at the lake. What a beautiful day it is. And you know, the other day, I said, it's really quiet here today. And it was really quiet. But it was especially quiet because I hadn't turned on the microphone to the camera, so that's why it was so quiet. You hear a little bit of noise out there, but it's a beautiful day. We don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of warm days left here at the lake. You can see the grass is starting to turn brown. It's no longer summer. It's now fall. Bill McNichol is here. He's asking you to please share this with other people. And I especially think it's important, please, to share today. Barbara Tichy is here. She shared. Cindy Franklin is here. She shared. All of you, please do us a favor and share this. This is going to be a fascinating show. And it's, you know, we had a great show yesterday with Dr. Greg Adams.
Greg Adams, good Dr. Adams, ask Dr. Greg.
And so if you haven't seen that one, you might want to get a look at it because he talked about living in these stressful times. He started out by speaking about it from the standpoint of healthcare workers who are under all kinds of stress. But we later in our discussion realized, you know, we are all under stress right now between the virus, between all the difficulties, the divisions in the country, the uncertainty about the election. And again, we call this getting angry. That doesn't mean you get to act like a damn fool. It means you store up your anger and use it to fuel your determination to do the right thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Glad to have so many of you here. Let's focus on our numbers. First of all, we're going to run through these really quickly because there's no really great news at this point. Still virtually 1,000 deaths a day or nearly that. 71, nearly 7.2 million people. It's a lot of people, a lot of cases here in the United States. 45,000 new cases yesterday. Here we go. This is, notice that Texas is working hard to get ahead of California. They've already got more total deaths than California, and they're going to catch up on cases if they aren't careful. Looks like in about 30 days, just about time for us to go to the polls. Here's Kentucky, and Kentucky is hanging in there, but because we still don't have a concerted effort at the national level to do the right damn thing, which we call, what do we call it? Going Godzilla. We're not willing to yet go Godzilla on this virus, so we remain 6 weeks away from doing the right thing. Let's have a look locally in my neighborhood here in Grayson County. 22 new cases Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That's 7 cases plus a day. So things are unfortunately picking up here. Let's look at this. And also, you know, I had a conversation yesterday with a friend who assured me that it's only old people dying. Not the case. In Caneyville, just down the road, we had a baby pass away. I wasn't able to read the rest of the story, but terrible, terrible news. Now, I want to make a pitch to you all. There's a news organization I want you all to consider looking at and considering contributing to. By the way, John Alma Barnett is here. John Alma's going to share. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. I want to tell you about this news organization that I rely on every day, and I have been bad. I haven't given them any money in a while, but I'm going to later today. It's called Naked Capitalism, nakedcapitalism.com. They've got a very interesting take on things. I believe their comments section is one of the best on the web. They do a broad array of stories. I find them incredibly informative, and they're in their fundraiser period, so do me a favor, have a look at them. You know, if you spent a week paying attention to what they are talking about, you'll first of all be better informed. And second of all, I think you'd be grateful for the independent message that they have. They are not predictably one way or the other. They are not predictably this or that, liberal or conservative, or there are a lot of progressives, but it's not simply that. So I do think they're wonderful. Now, before we call Pastor Lee, I want to call your attention to a couple of articles that have been in the Washington Post. Let me get my face out of here for a second. So this one is one I would strongly suggest you read. Hildegard Pyle is here from Breck County. Glad you're here, and she has certainly shared. This is correcting misinformation about Breonna Taylor, and I want to just read a few highlights from it. One of the comment, I'm reading from the article. Taylor's death was not, as Attorney General Cameron suggested, simply a tragedy for which no one is to blame. The police work in this case was sloppy, and the warrant service was reckless. Taylor is dead because of a cascade of errors, bad judgment, and dereliction of duty. I think that's really, really important to note that this is not just it's not simply a tragedy. There were mistakes made at virtually every stage of things by the police, by the judge. There were all kinds of problems. So one of the myths is that this was not a no-knock warrant. The Washington Post says it absolutely was. It says so right on the warrant. Now, unfortunately, there's a problem with that because apparently the description of the need for the no-knock portion was cut, copied, and pasted into a total of 5 warrants. They're supposed to each be unique. They're supposed to be, this is why this is important, which gives the judge a chance to behave properly. The next one is the police knocked and announced themselves and a witness heard them. This is probably the most frustrating part of Cameron's press event. He cited a single witness who claimed to have heard the officers identify themselves as the police. So the Washington Post spoke with Taylor's lawyers in June, who at that time had interviewed 11 of her neighbors. Many lived in the same apartment building as Taylor. According to the lawyers, no neighbor heard an announcement. The New York Times interviewed 12 neighbors. They found one, just one, who had actually heard the announcement, and he only heard one announcement. Only heard one announcement. He told the paper with all the commotion, it's entirely possible that Walker and Taylor didn't hear that announcement. AG Cameron did not mention this, which is a critical oversight. The man who shot at the police, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, was also a drug dealer. Taylor's ex-boyfriend was the drug dealer. The current boyfriend, Walker, was not named in any investigation. The previous boyfriend, Jamarcus Glover, was the main focus of the police investigation. Next is, if Kenneth Walker hadn't shot at the cops, Breonna Taylor would still be alive. Walker, the boyfriend, admits that he fired first, but he fired only after he and Taylor repeatedly asked who was pounding at the door and got no answer, and after a battering ram busted down the door. If Walker reasonably believed that the men breaking into his apartment were not police, he had every right to defend himself and Taylor. Bear in mind that Kentucky is, you don't need a license to have a gun in Kentucky. And Walker had gone the extra step to get a concealed carry license, which in 2019, Kentucky changed that law. You don't even need a license now to be concealed carry. So he was not breaking the law. Walker is not a criminal. Last one, because it's about time to call Pastor Lee. This is just an all-around tragedy. We shouldn't focus on who to blame, whether it's police, prosecutors, Walker, or Taylor. The most serious questions here concern the investigation itself and why these officers were asked to serve a warrant on Taylor's home in the first place. There's a lie about the postal inspector claimed that there was a suspicious package. Apparently that was a misrepresentation. There are police bullets that were inadvertently fired into other apartments, and so on and so on. There's the fact that five of the officers involved in the raid were involved in another violent, botched raid on an innocent family in 2018. There's also a study from 2018 by a criminologist, Brian Schaefer. He was able to embed himself with the Louisville police. 73 of the search warrant entries observed. Every entry that he observed involved using a ram to break the door down. And plus, they would announce police and boom, break the door down with very little time in between them. A detective explained, as long as we announce our presence, we are good. We don't want to give them any time to destroy evidence. We could prevent the next Breonna Taylor. We could ban forced entry raids to serve drug warrants. We could hold judges accountable for signing warrants that don't pass constitutional muster. We could demand that police officers wear body cameras during these raids to hold them accountable, and that they be adequately punished when they fail to activate them. We could do a lot more to make sure there are no more Breonna Taylors. The question is whether we want to. All right. I think that's a good time for us to reach out to Pastor Lee and see if we can get him on the phone. There we go.
Hello.
Pastor Lee.
Yes, sir. How you doing there?
Well, I'm doing okay, considering we've just finished talking a little bit about the Washington Post article that I sent to you that was clarifying some of the misinformation that's been going around about the Breonna Taylor case. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that article.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we have discussed some of this, and the thing we haven't discussed, and maybe I'll show a picture of this just briefly. I want to mention that Kentucky's only black female legislator, Attica Scott, was arrested last night for violation of curfew, and they've got some serious sounding aggravated charge that they're charging her with, and there's apparently some sort of accusation that she might have been involved with trying to set a library on fire. Have you met Attica Scott?
I have not.
Okay.
I've not had the privilege to meet her yet.
Yeah, I didn't know if you would have run into her. I, of course, ran into her doing events running up because the 2nd District bumps up into Louisville, and Attica showed up at some events here and there. So I've met Attica several times, and the idea that she would be attempting to burn down a library is about as believable as you wanting to burn down a library.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know her, but yeah, like you said, that's just a lot of things, that it's evident that there is the narrative is being controlled. One is we're told that we cannot release certain information because of the secrecy clause. But on the other hand, you are releasing other information on persons who've been arrested. And that at least is the appearance to control the narrative. For example, again, Kenneth Walker is an example. Certain information is being released to paint a certain picture or to portray certain persons in a certain light. But then you turn around and the information that is actually vital to the case that should be released. That's the frustrating part for me. I've had the opportunity to read 30-some pages of a report that was released. Again, there were certain things that have come out now that I kind of knew before it had been released. But unfortunately, again, the information that's being released, we got to ask ourselves, why is it being released?
Right.
And the information that should be released, that's not being released, why is it not being released? We know why we're being told it's not being released. And obviously, I think the governor in this case is giving wise advice that we need to release the information and trust the people in the Commonwealth. Because, and let's be honest about it, as much as I hate to say this, the truth of the matter is we can't say that everybody is present for the same reason. And unfortunately, the minority of those persons who are destroying property and doing things, it is overshadowing the more majority of those who I believe are there for the right reason, which is justice and fairness. But, again, I think that's the unfortunate part. I think that, again, the AG, he, if I was him, I would not, because the issue now is, did you make the call or did you allow due process to take place? No, what evidence that was presented, at this point, if you got to keep this in mind. People don't trust government, number one. We don't trust our judicial system because, again, time and time again and again, we've been let down. We've been disappointed. We're not talking about the things that was shady and that was questionable. We're talking about things that we have seen in plain sight. Again, things have been explained away in such a way, but when we begin to raise certain questions, then we don't get adequate answers. Again, if the AG is the one who made the call, he needs to be man enough to come out and say, my office made the call. If the information, I watched the interview this morning, I think it was in poor taste that the family learned the verdict at the same time that the public did. I think that was poor taste. I think that her mother deserved better than that. And I think there's several things, there's several things that I think they bring up legitimate concerns, as to, why is it, what led up to the no-knock warrant that was issued? Why can't that information be shared? So there's a number of things that I see in that holes, and the thing we have to understand, because an attitude of doubt seems to overshadow things. Why would you leave it open like that? If they don't fill in the holes with the facts by making the information available, they're going to leave it to the public to fill in the blanks, whether they fill it in with accurate information or inaccurate information. They're going to fill it in. And, where do we go from here? There's a piece called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or community.
Chaos or community. That's a good one.
That's it. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? The bottom line is, I think, to a large degree, the answer to that question has to do with the way persons in positions of authority handles this situation. When we look, there's not even consensus between the governor and the AG, those in law enforcement, the mayor. There's division within leadership itself and how this case is being handled. We're not even talking about the citizens yet, and again, there's so many reports out there. People are hearing so many things, because when this thing first happened, I know that the way it was presented, it left one perception. As I received additional information, my perception, my initial perception changed. Even as recent as today, listening at the attorneys for Breonna Taylor's family, listening at the arguments they made today, there were things that were lifted and questions that I contend are legitimate questions. You say that it was not a no-knock warrant. It's clear that it's on the warrant, and then you say that you was told to disregard that part. There's a question about the ambulance being dismissed. again, out of 12 people interviewed who say they did not hear the knock or them identifying themselves, you say there's one person that says he or she heard it, and yet you don't identify that person. You don't tell how close in proximity that person was. What makes that one person's yes, I heard it, overshadow the 11 or 12 people who say they did not hear it, you know, et cetera. So there's just a number of things that's frustrating in this situation. You know, you say when you entered, you saw both parties standing at the end of the hall. It's Mr. Walker. He admits that he fired the first shot. I feel that we demonized him, but let's put ourselves in his shoes. There are a number of things that we need to take into consideration. If I'm in bed that time of morning with my wife, and I hear this banging on the door, and if you did not, listen, they did not identify themselves, and then my door is burst open, and I have a weapon, listen, I'm going to defend my family. Yeah. You know, so, but we demonized him, saying that as if he's the culprit, is the one who started, if he had never fired the shot. You know, of course, obviously, if he fires the shot, law enforcement is going to return fire. But again, the thing that's interesting in my mind, 6 shots are released by, you know, by the officer shot, and 6 shots enter into Breonna, and not one shot hits Walker, who's in the same hole, and he's the one who fires the shot.
Yeah.
You know,
You know, I recall so many different stories that that all appeared to be justifying the idea that a young woman could get killed in her own apartment, even though there were mistakes made. I mean, there's just been this willingness to say, well, therefore, it's just an accident or it's just a tragedy that she was killed, but it's nothing wrong. I see all kinds of stuff that's wrong here. And
that is correct.
I see, you know, in this Washington Post article, which lays it out as clearly as possible, that there was really terrible police work. Shoddy police work was the word they used.
Yes.
Now, shoddiness might be just, you know, the bad apple argument, someone who doesn't really do a good job just generally. But why does that bad job always seem to be done in the West End of Louisville?
Yes.
Why does that have to happen? And look, I grew up in Louisville, and I don't know how much time you've spent there, but we all know that Louisville's a divided city. We know that when you're on Broadway and you're heading west and you cross 9th Street, you are now in Black Louisville, just by crossing 9th Street. Yeah. And it has been that way since I grew up there in the 70s. There have been divisions. Yes, there are parts of town where we have a tremendous amount of diversity in. When I was growing up, we had a tremendous amount of diversity in the Highlands. That's where I grew up. But generally, you know, if you're Black, you probably come from the West End. They call it the Best End, by the way.
Yeah.
And you know, my wife worked in a grocery store down there when she was 16 years old back in the day, worked at a Winn-Dixie, and worked as a cashier down there. So we have understood this division within our society. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Hedges, but he's a journalist who's written for the Wall Street Journal or for the New York Times, I believe. And he's gotten fairly radical in his old age. But one of the things he talks about is the difficulty we have standing up for the rights of people we don't know. That if you're a privileged person in one sense or another, either because of money or because you're not from that neighborhood or whatever, it can be difficult to stand up for a group that's under threat. And he said the cure to that is friendship. He said it's one thing, even if you've got money and you contribute to causes and you do the right thing, you're still disconnected. But when you get involved with families that are from a certain neighborhood or that are under threat, he said, then the offenses that occur to them become personal to you. And You said what, chaos or community. And I think that's just an extension of your statement, that through community, we can develop willingness to stand up for each other, even if it's not particularly affecting our community.
Mhm. Yes, because ultimately, if things are left unchecked, sooner or later it will make its way to our community.
Absolutely.
And I think the other part of it is we need to revisit our understanding of community and to be more inclusive in community. I think you're right. When we limit our community to the people who look like us and have shared experiences, and that's the only people who make up our community and who represent our self-interest. I think I said it in a piece that I did earlier this week. Whenever the dominant culture creates a culture that is not inclusive of all persons, there will always be a subculture that will be created that will go counterculture to that culture.
Right.
It's important that we understand that, because at the end of the day, we all live on this earth. And what affects one will eventually, or sooner or later, have an impact on others. One friend of mine said it this way: don't laugh at the mailman who gets bit by the dog across the street, because all the dog has to do is cross the street.
Yeah.
You know, and, yeah. So it's unfortunate that if we go back to America's Bible, and what I refer to America's Bible as is the Constitution, we talk about the fact that we believe that all men are created equal. And until we move from theory to practice, until if that's truly our creed, if that is truly what we believe, then that needs to be reflected in our society, in our systems, in our judicial system, in our healthcare system, in our educational system, etc. But as long as we continue to have the George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor and the Ahmaud Arbery situations, and the verdicts continue to come back this way, you can tell me in theory all day that you believe that all men are created equal. But the message you continue to send back to me in practice is diametrically opposed to that message that you say you believe in your Bible, the Constitution.
You know, that's one of the things, again, they say in the Washington Post, we can deal with these things. You know, we could hold the judge accountable for being lazy about approving 5 no-knock warrants with the same verbiage. That's in violation right there. You know, they really wanted unique verbiage for each of those 5 warrants. We could demand that police officers wear body cameras. I mean, Attica Scott, I'm going to read a quote from her. You know, by the way, Attica has been released. She's out. She's been a state representative since 2017. Her district is the 41st, which is in Louisville, and it's a strangest looking district you've seen. It's gerrymandered to death. But anyway, she's one of the authors of, she's pre-filed a bill to end no-knock search warrants, and she filed that on August 6th. It's called, or 16th, Breonna's Law, which would force police to knock and verbally announce themselves, and it also requires a judge to approve the use of violent entry when introducing the warrant. Officers would also have to activate their body cameras when serving the warrant. And her quote is, 5 minutes before you serve that warrant and 5 minutes after, those body cameras had better be on, when she announced the bill. Now, you know, I think there's always going to be mistakes made. But when we rely, when we know we can get away with mistakes, when we know that we can just phone it in a little bit, that no one's going to give it a second look, that I'm not going to be punished for taking these shortcuts that ultimately end up depriving people of their lives. If I'm not going to get called on it, I'm going to keep doing it if I'm that type of person, right?
Correct.
So obviously the Louisville Police Department needs massive reform. And I want to say this. I started, my idea to run for Congress, which I decided in 2017, and doing it in the 2nd District was because I believed that the neglect of districts like the 2nd, particularly by the Democratic Party, meant that we had an ability to create a new Democratic Party, a Democratic Party that would once again focus on working people, that would once again be willing to keep the banks and Wall Street in line, and that would also be willing to further the cause of justice, that would be willing to deal with climate change. Well, now here we are, Louisville, along with Minneapolis and Kenosha, I guess, in Wisconsin. Right now it's Louisville's turn to be the center of the universe in the job of civil rights. This is the 3rd great civil rights movement in the history of our nation. The first being the Civil War, the second being the civil rights movement in the 60s. This is the current moment. And this is our chance to do a better job to get things done properly. And I don't think we can underestimate how important this is. This is critically important for all of our liberties, for all of our equalities. I don't care who you are. There's any number of reasons you are different from the person standing next to you. And we are so used to being so divided. I see this all the time. The amount of division that is going on is not good for anybody that I'm aware of, but it's definitely good for somebody. Somebody benefits, and my fear is that it's people who make a lot of money over keeping us divided. Chris Hedges uses the phrase, the primacy of profit, that's how we make decisions. There's a young man that I met at Shake Rag who owns and operates the Shake Rag Barbershop, Chris. And I think you probably know Chris.
Chris Page, yes.
Yep. And we're hoping to have Chris on sometime, perhaps next week. So Chris, if you're listening, we'd love to have you come on and talk. One of the things we talked about is the issue in Bowling Green, and I should mention your church, Mount Zion Baptist, is in Bowling Green. And there's a historic district there called Shake Rag, which is a traditionally African-American district. And Chris argues that the barbershop is the center of it. Maybe somebody else would argue differently, but I took him at his word. And we started talking about the pressures of gentrification inside Bowling Green, where this district that's been home to Black families for how many generations? 5, 6, 7 generations, who knows, is under pressure from folks who are coming in and developing. And we started talking about, well, how do you do this? Because gentrification, I think in a lot of cases, starts with the idea of wanting to do the right thing, right? There's the idea of wanting to build up a neighborhood, but it never seems to go well for the people who live there, never. Perhaps someone brought up one exception, which involved Columbia University, which worked with the neighborhood. But anyway, Chris started talking about he wanted the federal government to come in with investments that could allow business owners in Shake Rag to get special loans or special tax considerations, that sort of thing, to encourage neighborhoods to stay together, but still allow them to step up and become more livable and more modernized where it's needed. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, you and I had a conversation, and I want to thank you publicly for a piece that you introduced me to. I had the privilege of watching a documentary that was really not even 2 weeks old now, Capital in the 21st Century.
Yes.
Powerful piece, very insightful. Because once we understand that, you mentioned, let me back up and mention the fact you mentioned that I pastor here in Bowling Green, and you're talking about gentrification, and you have to remember that the gentrification did not start with Shake Rag community.
No.
We have to remember that the very congregation I pastor, we are where we are as a result of gentrification. Mount Zion was birthed in an African-American community known as Jonesville,
yep,
which was situated where Western Kentucky University is situated now. And unfortunately, as a result of gentrification, they were moved out against their will. There are some of my older congregants who are still bitter today about that act. And so I think that, one, we have to look at history and learn from history so that we don't repeat the mistakes in our history. But back to the documentary that you turned me on to, the number one thing that is important is that we understand that we live in a capitalistic society. Two things drive everything in our society, and that is capital economics and politics. And from the federal level down, we continue to see politics being lifted over that which is in the best interest of people. We look at correcting systemic evil. We have to understand it's going to always be a struggle because it is not in the best interest as some perceive it. The system they're benefiting from it. And so why should they change it? And I think that's what's important for us to understand, that while communities like Jonesville and Shagrad may have had great sentimental value on many levels, but when we look at America and we look at the fact we're a capitalistic society, we have people who are investors who are coming in to Bowling Green who are not even from Bowling Green and buying up property, and they're actually starting businesses and things, ventures here. Again, having no relationship with the people here. So again, making decisions that strictly business oriented has nothing to do with no knowledge of the people and what's in the best interest of the people here. And so an argument could even be made, while that's a bad business decision, because ultimately, again, when the quality of the lives of the people here are affected in certain ways, we will act out in certain ways. Let's look at the protests that's taking place. It's not all peaceful. And we never justify destruction of people or property. But the truth of the matter is, people are frustrated. They tried it the legal way. They trusted our judicial system, only to be failed repeatedly, to be disappointed. And after a while, when people are not getting the results, they think that they should be getting the justice and the fairness. Listen, someone says the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same things the same old way, expecting a different result. So if I'm not getting it one way, listen, they're going to try and find it another way.
Yes, as they should. And there is much in common with neighborhoods that are with the Shagrad district and with the needs of rural communities way out into the district. Mm-hmm. There's much in common. In the same way, wages have stagnated. Healthcare's gotten more expensive. There's not enough broadband. Broadband does not cover enough people. I'm hearing, I'm hearing stories of people who they're trying to get their kids through, the online schooling, and you get out into the state, and they're having to load their kids into a car and show up at a McDonald's where there's free Wi-Fi, so their kid can be online to be able to participate in school. And go ahead.
Now, I think you're on to something, and what I've been thinking about is who controls the narrative. Yeah. Who controls the narrative? Because people's perception is their reality, at least to them. And I think to a large degree, the information you're sharing now, we must be intentional in framing that in such a way, because we can't afford to assume that everyone understands that. We have an organization here in Bowling Green called Game Changers. And one of the things that we're finding as we're presenting data to people, We're talking about people in positions of authority that has the power to affect the change that needs to be affected. One of the things that we're finding is it's because of the perception or the misperception that they have. They don't perceive that things are as bad as they are.
Right.
They perceive that, everything is wonderful here. It's
Right.
not wonderful. It's not okay. And the numbers that you're giving, the information you're sharing about the relationship between the rural and what is happening in Bowling Green proper, that is crucial. That is critical. And then there has to be some accountability about for those persons who are in the positions of authority to affect the change, but will not affect the change.
That's a careful way of saying that the people who have the possibility to make a difference, to do the right thing, don't seem to do it because they are served by the division, by the people who contribute to them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's nothing new. That's nothing new. And
right.
and we have to understand that. And so the question then becomes, how do we operate in a system, in a society where certain people are benefiting from systems that are actually exploiting and oppressing others in that system or that society?
Yeah.
One is doing what you're doing, and that is having these type of platforms where we are presenting the kind of information that's educating people. But again, that's a good place to start, but it's not a good place to stop. Because the truth of the matter is we cannot assume that ignorance is the problem. Because some people are very aware of the issue and they're building on other people's ignorance. That's what we have to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another person that I read a whole lot, and at some point I'll send you a link to, Thomas Frank. He wrote a book called Listen Liberal, which he wrote in 2016. And he was saying that because you have let down the working class, the people who work, you Democrats, you liberals don't see what's coming. And he literally let us know that what happened in 2016 was coming. And
Yes.
he believes that the only way that this change goes on, by the way, he's got a new book called The People Know, and it's a history of populism and anti-populism. And we are seeing all sorts of similarities between the roots of populism, which happened in the late 1800s in Kansas when farmers banded together and became a political force, to what's going on now. But he believes that it's going to require a mass political movement. Now, for example, seems to me that mass political movement would include Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign. But they, on their own, will not be sufficient. They will not be sufficient to do the job. And that's going to be that. I had a conversation with someone who was an organizer who's recently retired. And his comment was, you have to organize the organizations. You have to get the organizations to be willing to work together. So like the Poor People's Campaign and like the Rural Council, which has just been formed by the Kentucky Democratic Party. There's a Rural Council to advise the KDP that I'm part of. So that's going to be part of my job going forward, no matter what happens on November 3rd, is finding ways that we can all work together and find ways that we are able to reflect, respect, and build our common humanity into values that can be reflected in our government.
Yes. And those relationships that you were referring to is what Dr. Barber calls fusion coalitions.
Oh.
And which I work with the Poor People's Campaign as well. And again, those that we fuse together with can't be people who just look like us.
Right. That's not going to be sufficient. That won't be enough.
It won't be enough. And no one individual or group of individuals will ever be able to solve this problem in and of themselves. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And that has to be a focus, not on our differences, but what we have in common.
Absolutely.
Looking back at history only to learn from the mistakes of our past so as to not repeat those mistakes going forward, and that's what's going to be crucial. That's what's going to be critical. But as long as, again, there is the haves and the have-nots, and as long as the haves continue to benefit from the system as it is, listen, we've got, and I know, there are people who pay not to live where certain people live.
Right.
So the reason they can't relate to it, the problems, some of the issues that we're talking about, because they don't see it. They pay to not live there. They pay not to shop there and to not eat where these folks. So I don't see it. So I'm, to some degree, listen, I'm oblivious to it because I don't want to. I don't want to see it. As a matter of fact, I'm privileged. I'm privileged. I'm fortunate, and I don't care what's going on as long as it doesn't affect me.
And
but
the irony is, your life is richer the deeper you get involved outside of your own community. Your life becomes richer, and that's an argument that I liked. That I don't know that many very wealthy people, but if I could speak to Jeff Bezos, I'd say, look, your life will be better if you don't have to build huge walls around. If the rest of us are better educated, if the rest of us are a little better, a little better off, and if we're healthy, your life will be better if our lives are better.
Yeah, and and I know that better is relative.
Yep.
And so what is better for one may not be considered better by others. And that's the thing. We live in a society that is fluid on many levels. There are no absolutes, and nothing is concrete. And so consequently, again, what's better for one may be bad for another. And unfortunately, as the love of men continues to grow colder and colder, and as we lose the love for each other, again, it becomes about me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm back to wanting us all to focus on finding ways to be friends, to focus on friendship. I think that's a powerful motivator. It's a powerful way to organize. It's a powerful way to find commonality. And Pastor Lee, I want to thank you always for being there when I need help. Every once in a while, I reach out to you, and you calm me down when I'm upset about something. So thank you for that.
Man, you're a great guy. Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you.
And I appreciate your inspiration. You're an inspiring man, and always enjoy hearing you speak. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us sometime, okay?
Anytime. And the only thing I want to share with the friendship piece is that the only thing I caution against that is that we cannot, when we talk about friendship, we cannot adopt the Rodney King philosophy. Why can't we all just get along?
Oh,
because that's a conversation for another show. But we can't just all get along, go along to get along. And there's a difference between uniformity and unity. And I'll leave that right there.
I hope you have a great day. Everybody says hi. John Alma was here. Pam was here.
Awesome.
A bunch of people said hi to you. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hank.
All right. You have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pastor Lee. Well, thank you all for being here. That was a long conversation and really valuable to me. I really do value Pastor Lee's guidance and his perspective. And I hope you all understand the significance of this time in American history. This is a serious moment that we have to once again try to get things right for the cause of civil rights, for the causes of equality and justice. This is an important moment. And I think it begins with making sure you get out to vote. Remember, October 5th, which is days away, is how long you have to register. And I believe early voting in Kentucky starts October 18th. I'm going to be voting early. Thank you all so much. Now, tomorrow, by the way, we're going to 6 or 7 days a week here with with getting angry. I started out going 7 days a week when I started in March, I think is when I started. Started going 7 days a week and it almost killed me. But I think between now and I backed it down to 5. Now I think we're going to go back to 7. And starting tomorrow, we'll be focusing on trying to raise some money. I do need to raise some money for the campaign, so contributions are very helpful. Bill has put up our Venmo link. Please go to the contribute section of our page, hankforkentuckyky.com. Doesn't have to be a lot of money. It just contribute something and help us out. So tomorrow we'll start by showing some videos that folks have sent to me in solidarity and contributing, and we'll be at the same time. We'll be at 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern. At the moment, all the videos I have are from men. And so if there are any women artists out there, I'm reaching out to some, but I haven't gotten enough any videos yet from women performers, children performers, young people, and whatever it is you would like to do, please get in touch with me at hankforkentucky.com. Thank you all so much. What a great thing to have Pastor Lee here. Remember, just because you're getting angry doesn't give you the right to behave like a damn fool. You use your anger to focus yourself, to focus your determination, and that leads to you using your bravery to do what needs to be done, and that's where you find hope. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.